The stingray spine pierced through for the 7th time, and the 16-year-old Maya prince's scream turned into something no longer human. Blood spread beneath him on strips of bark paper, each drop a payment to gods who never seemed pleased. His shaking hands guided the spine through soft flesh, not in madness but in the most sacred ritual his people knew. The rough rope waited next, curled like a snake beside the jade altar. This wasn't torture. This was a test with the universe itself. In the smoke-filled temple hall, priests watched with cold, judging eyes. One mistake, one flinch too many, one refusal to go on, and the boy would lose more than his claim to the throne. He'd lose his right to rule, his very place among the noble. The gods were watching through the smoke, the blood, even the stones of the temple. They demanded proof that this young prince could pay the cost of power. His name was Itzamna, and in 3 hours he would either rise as a divine king or leave broken and forgotten. The rope began its path through the wounds the spine had carved. But how could an entire civilization build its power on ritual bloodletting of this kind? And why did teenage boys compete to suffer the most brutal sexual pain their bodies could survive? To understand this faith built on blood, we must go back 1,000 years into Maya history, back to when humans first learned that their gods were starving, dying beings who needed endless feeding, and that the best offering was human suffering, taken fresh from the most private parts of the body. The preparation began 3 weeks before the first spine touched flesh. Young Itzamna hadn't eaten solid food in 10 days. His stomach had passed hunger and entered a strange floating emptiness that made the world shimmer at the edges. In the dark chamber under the temple, no light, no sound except dripping water. The line between dreaming and waking broke down. By the time the priests came for him, he couldn't tell if the serpents on the walls were painted or alive. But the drugs were only beginning to work. Morning glory's seeds, always counted to 13, had been crushed with cacao and mixed with venom milked from a sacred toad. Itzamna drank the brew as dawn rose over Kopan, his city, his inheritance, his trial. Within minutes, the stone faces on the temple walls began to breathe. Their eyes followed him as the priests led him into the chamber of bloodletting. Here's where it grows dark. This wasn't just about manhood or even proving he was worthy to rule. The Maya believed, truly believed, that without these offerings of royal blood, the sun would not rise the next day. Not as a symbol, but for real. The universe was a dying machine, and noble blood was the only fuel. The first spine came from a stingray caught in holy waters during the new moon, longer than a man's hand, jagged like a saw, blessed to open doors between worlds. Itzamna had to push it through himself. No priest could help. No god would ease the pain. The gods wanted to see his personal devotion. What happened next would decide the kingdom's future. The spine entered just below the head of his penis, pressed through with steady slowness, not too quick, which meant fear, not too slow, which showed weakness. The pain had shape, color, sound. It tasted like copper and rang like bronze bells. Blood spilled onto the bark paper below, each drop forming glyphs that the priests would later read as messages from the gods. 6 more times, 6 more piercings, each at a new angle, making a crown of wounds. Between each cut, Itzamna had to speak the names of his ancestors, call to the gods by their hidden titles, and fight to stay awake through the shock pulling him toward blackness. Other noble boys had failed here, fainting, vomiting, refusing to go on. They lived, but as shadows forever marked as too weak to carry divine responsibility. The rope wasn't finished with him yet. 3 arms lengths of Maggie rope, each fiber embedded with thorns no bigger than fish scales but sharp enough to catch and tear. The rope had soaked for days in the blood of sacrificed quails, in honey, and in the juice of psychoactive mushrooms. Now it would pass through the wounds the spines had created, dragging its 1,000 tiny teeth through channels of raw flesh. Itzamna pulled. The priests chanted. The stone faces on the walls opened their mouths in silent screams, or ecstasy. In his state he couldn't tell the difference. The rope moved through him like a living thing, like a serpent made of fire, like the umbilical cord connecting him to the heart of creation. His vision exploded into geometries of light. He saw the gods waiting behind the veil of reality, their hands extended for payment. The blood on the bark paper had formed patterns, now messages about drought and warfare, about the need for captives, about which neighboring cities would fall and which would stand. Itzamna's blood was writing the future of his kingdom. Every drop mattered. Every moment of agony translated into divine intelligence. This ritual, the exos luequi, the flower song, was just the beginning of a young noble's relationship with sacred pain. If he survived and the gods accepted his offering, he'd repeat variations throughout his life. Before battle, during droughts, at the birth of heirs, each time the instruments would grow more extreme, the bloodletting more profound. But why? Why would an entire class of young men compete to endure such horrific mutilation? Because in the Maya world, cosmic power flowed through suffering. The boy who could endure the most, who could feed the gods most generously with his pain, would command not just armies, but the very forces of nature. Rain would come at his call. Enemy armies would flee before his divinely charged presence. The cosmos would bend to his will because he'd proven willing to pay its price in the most intimate currency imaginable. If teenage princes endured this for power, imagine what their queens sacrificed for prophecy. Lady Suk bit down on the leather strap as her attendants brought forth the rope. The queen of Yakshilan had fasted for 20 days, drinking only bolche fermented honey mixed with the bark of the sacred tree. Her tongue, swollen from ritual preparations, protruded between her teeth. The jade bowl beneath her chin waited to catch what would come. Unlike her husband's public bloodletting, this would happen in the inner sanctum, witnessed only by the goddess Ixchel's marble eyes. The rope had been specially prepared, not the thorn-studded horror used for male genitals, but something far more refined and terrible. A cord made from human hair, each strand taken from a woman who had died in childbirth, braided with fibers from the hallucinogenic morning glory vine. The thorns embedded in it were from the sacred ceiba tree, each one no longer than an eyelash, but sharp enough to pierce the veil between worlds. What happened next would determine the kingdom's fate. The first pass of the rope through her tongue opened a channel, not just through flesh, but through reality itself. Lady Suk's attendants had pierced the organ with obsidian needles, creating a hole that wept blood and saliva. Now the rope would pass through, back and forth, each movement tearing the wound wider, while the thorns caught and released. Blood filled her mouth, hot, metallic, alive with power. She couldn't swallow, couldn't spit. It overflowed the jade bowl, splattered the bark paper, spread beneath her knees. But this wasn't simple bloodletting. This was Kuhul Bak, the sacred opening. And through her pierced tongue would come the words of gods. The vision serpent manifested first as smoke, copal incense mixed with blood-soaked paper, burned in braziers, creating clouds that shouldn't have held shape, but did. The serpent's head emerged from Lady Suk's own mouth, born from her blood and pain. Its body coiled up toward the chamber's painted ceiling. Its scales were made of stars. Its eyes were the births and deaths of suns. From its jaws emerged the figure she had been seeking, an ancestor dead for centuries, his mouth opening to speak prophecy. But wait, we're not even at the worst part. The rope had to keep moving. Even as visions consumed her consciousness, even as divine voices flooded her awareness, Lady Suk's hands had to maintain the rhythm. Pull through, reverse, pull through. The thorns had transformed her tongue into a tunnel of wounds, each one a tiny mouth speaking its own prayer. Blood ran down her chin, her chest, pooled in her lap, where the bark paper captured every drop. These female bloodletters weren't seeking the political power of kingship. They were after something far more potent, the ability to speak with unquestionable divine authority. When Lady Suk emerged from this chamber, Her prophecies would guide military campaigns, determine succession, declare which captives lived and which fed the altars. Her words, born from blood and suffering, would carry more weight than any king's command, because they came directly from the mouths of gods. The gendered division of bloodletting reveals something profound about Maya cosmology. Men bled from their penises, the source of procreative power, the symbol of worldly authority. Women bled from their tongues, the organ of speech, prophecy, and divine communication. Both were sexual in the deepest sense, involving the most intimate and vulnerable parts of the body. Both required the practitioner to consciously choose agony in pursuit of cosmic connection. Here's where it gets truly dark. The blood wasn't just an offering. It was a medium. The Maya believed that blood, especially blood from erogenous zones, carried Ku, the divine life force that animated everything from humans to stars. When Lady Suk bled from her tongue, she was creating a substance that could literally carry messages between worlds. The bark paper beneath her wasn't just catching blood, it was recording a conversation with the universe itself. The vision's serpent coiled tighter, its mouth opening wider. Through it, Lady Suk saw the future. Armies marching, cities burning, a great drought approaching that would require unprecedented sacrifices. She saw her own death peaceful and honored. She saw her daughter taking up the rope and needles, continuing the tradition. All of this knowledge flowed through the wounds in her tongue, each revelation paid for with another pass of the thorned rope. When the ritual finally ended, Lady Suk couldn't speak for days. Her tongue, swollen beyond recognition, made eating impossible. But the bark papers, now dry and carefully preserved, contained intelligence that would guide Yaxchilan through the coming crisis. Her physical voice had been temporarily destroyed so that the voice of the cosmos could speak through her. The attendants helped her from the chamber, her legs unsteady from blood loss and visions. Tomorrow the king would read her prophecies and plan accordingly. Wars would be declared or avoided, based on what she had seen. Lives would be saved or sacrificed according to the will of the gods spoken through her mutilated tongue. These individual sacrifices were just drops feeding an ocean because the Maya universe was dying every single day. Every sunrise was a miracle that someone had already paid for in blood. The Maya didn't see the universe as a stable, eternal machine. They saw it as a dying patient on life support. And that life support ran on human suffering. This wasn't metaphor or primitive superstition. This was observed reality, backed by 1,000 years of theological calculation. The cosmos was entropy made manifest, and only through constant infusions of Ko, divine life force, could the slide into darkness be momentarily reversed. Think of the gods as machines requiring specific fuel, not benevolent creators resting after their labors, but desperate entities locked in eternal combat with chaos. The sun god, Kinich Aho, died every night, literally died, and had to be resurrected through blood sacrifice to fight his way across the sky again. The maize god was perpetually dismembered and needed human suffering to be reconstituted. Even the rain god, Chake, especially Chake, demanded payment before releasing his life-giving waters. But why blood? Why specifically sexual blood? The Maya creation myth provides the answer, and it's darker than anything modern minds can easily grasp. In the beginning, the gods masturbated the universe into existence. This isn't crude mythology. This is sophisticated cosmological theory. The first god pierced his penis with a thorn, and from the flowing blood mixed with semen came the primal water. The goddess Ixchel received this bloody emission, and from it birthed the world. Creation itself was a sexual wound that never healed, and it leaked Ko, divine life force, at a catastrophic rate. Now here's where it gets truly dark. Imagine your electricity bill, but paid in pain. The Maya calculated the exact exchange rate between human suffering and cosmic stability. A drop of ear blood might keep a star burning for an hour. A pierced tongue could fuel the moon for a night. But genital bloodletting, that was premium currency. The pain was more intense, the symbolism more potent, the Ko extracted more pure. The mathematics of suffering were precise. The priests kept careful records tracking which types of bloodletting produced which result. They noticed patterns. Droughts ended after royal penis bloodletting. Enemy armies retreated after queens bled from their tongues. Crops flourished when children offered blood from their earlobes. This wasn't coincidence to them. This was cause and effect, as clear as dropping a stone and watching it fall. Remember, these weren't crazy people. These were sophisticated astronomers who could predict eclipses centuries in advance. Engineers who built cities that still stand today. Mathematicians who invented zero independently. When they said the universe needed blood to survive, they meant it with the same certainty that we say the Earth orbits the sun. The sexual component wasn't arbitrary. The Maya understood that sexual energy and life force were inextricably linked. The same power that created life could sustain the universe, but only if offered voluntarily, consciously, with full understanding of the cosmic transaction taking place. A penis wasn't just a penis. It was a conduit for creative force. A tongue wasn't just for speaking. It was the channel through which divine wisdom flowed. These organs were chosen because they were the most direct connections to the cure that kept reality itself from dissolving. What they discovered changed everything about how they structured society. If the universe needed constant feeding, then someone had to do the feeding. Not everyone that would be inefficient, but a dedicated class of noble feeders, trained from birth to endure maximum suffering to extract maximum kuro from their own body. These weren't victims, but cosmic technicians, as essential to Maya civilization as power plant workers are to ours. The debt kept growing. Each generation calculated that more blood was needed than the last. What started as occasional royal bloodletting became regular schedules of pain. What began with willing nobles expanded to require captives, slaves, anyone with blood to give. The universe was a hungry god, and its appetite only grew with feeding. The Maya worldview makes sense only when you truly grasp this point. They believed with absolute certainty that without constant blood sacrifice, the sun would not rise, the rain would not fall, the crops would not grow, and the universe would collapse back into the primordial darkness from which it came. Every dawn was a victory someone had purchased with pain. Every rainfall was a divine response to human suffering. Every successful harvest proved that the blood payments were working. This wasn't faith. This was observed reality, confirmed by centuries of correlation. When bloodletting decreased, disasters increased. When sacrifices intensified, prosperity followed. The Maya had discovered, or thought they had discovered, the operating system of reality itself, and that operating system ran on blood. So if the universe needed constant feeding, where would they find enough sacrificial fuel? The answer transformed warfare forever. The war party ignored the gold, the jade, even the grain stores. They were hunting for something far more valuable. Lord Smoking Squirrel of Naranjo led his warriors through the jungle paths, their faces painted with the black of war and the blue of the hunt. They'd been tracking the royal convoy from Karakal for 3 days, letting them move deeper into the kill zone. This wasn't about territory or treasure. This was about capturing human batteries for the cosmic machine. The Maya didn't wage war like other civilizations. Cities rarely changed hands. Populations weren't enslaved en masse. Instead, warfare was a careful harvesting operation, as precise as collecting rubber from trees without killing them. You wanted the enemy city to survive, to recover, to raise another generation of nobles whose blood would one day flow on your altar. Sustainable sacrifice, that was the key to long-term cosmic maintenance. But wait, we're not even at the worst part. The ambush erupted at dawn. Smoking Squirrel's warriors burst from concealment, but their weapons told the real story. Weighted nets, blunted spears designed to stun, not kill, obsidian clubs with carefully filed edges that would incapacitate without causing fatal wounds. This wasn't battle. This was a shopping trip with violence. Prince Cacao Seed of Karakal fought magnificently, which only increased his value. The harder a noble resisted, the more divine life force he clearly possessed. His personal guard died around him, but the attackers took elaborate care to keep the prince himself alive. A dead royal was worthless. A living one could power the cosmos for months. Here's where the horror deepens. Both sides understood the rules. Cacao Seed knew that if captured, he faced not immediate death, but months, possibly years of carefully managed bloodletting before his final sacrifice. He'd be treated with honor, fed the finest foods, given comfortable quarters, even allowed to participate in rituals. He'd become a living battery, drained slowly to maximize output. Some captured nobles even developed Stockholm Syndrome, coming to believe in the righteousness of their captor's cause. The Maya war capture system reveals something profound about their worldview. Enemy nobles weren't enemies at all. They were colleagues in the cosmic maintenance profession. A captured lord from Palenque had the same divine responsibility as a lord from Tikal. Feed the hungry universe. The only question was, whose altar would collect the payment? Smoking Squirrel's warriors bound Cacao Seed with cords made from human hair, not to humiliate, but to honor. These weren't simple ropes, but sacred objects, each strand taken from a warrior who died in battle, braided into a capture cord that carried its own spiritual power. To be bound with such a cord was to be recognized as a fellow participant in the cosmic drama. The mathematics of capture were precise. A king was worth approximately 100 commoners in terms of cure extraction. A royal prince might equal 50. A noble warrior, perhaps 10. The Maya didn't practice indiscriminate slaughter because it was inefficient. Why waste precious cure by spilling it on jungle floors when it could be carefully collected on sacred altars? Now remember, these weren't madmen. The captured nobles often agreed with their fate. They'd grown up in the same theological system, believed the same cosmic truths. Many went to the altars willingly, even eagerly, knowing their deaths would ensure the sunrise, bring the rains, keep the universe spinning for another cycle. They were martyrs to a cause everyone, captive and captor alike, believed in utterly. The journey back to Naranjo took 5 days. Cacao Seed was carried in a palanquin, fed fruit and honeyed water, treated with the deference due to sacred cargo. Smoking Squirrel's warriors sang the flower songs, hymns about sacrifice and renewal, about the honor of feeding the gods. By the time they reached the city, word had spread. The population lined the streets, not jeering at an enemy, but welcoming a holy figure whose blood would ensure their survival. What happened next would determine the kingdom's fate, not just Naranjo's, but the cosmic kingdom that included every star, every heartbeat, every drop of rain. Cacao Seed would join other captured nobles in the temple complex, beginning his new life as a divine battery. His blood would be harvested according to the ritual calendar, a little during the planting season, more during droughts, everything during the final ceremony that would send his cure directly to the gods. The genius of Maya warfare was its sustainability. By focusing on capture over killing, by targeting nobles over commoners, by maintaining enemy cities as breeding grounds for future sacrifices, they created a system that could theoretically continue forever. Wars became predictable, almost ritualized affairs. Cities took turns raiding each other, ensuring a steady supply of noble blood without apocalyptic destruction. Once captured, these human batteries faced a fate that made death seem merciful. The blue paint felt cool against his skin, the last gentle touch he would ever feel. Prince Cacao Seed stood atop the pyramid of Naranjo 2 months after his capture. The priests had been painting him since dawn, covering every inch of skin with the sacred blue made from clay and indigo. This wasn't decoration. This was transformation. The blue turned captives into temporary avatars of the rain god Chak, their deaths becoming not executions, but divine metamorphoses. Below in the plaza, 10,000 people watched in religious ecstasy. They'd been fasting for days, preparing their souls to witness cosmic maintenance in action. The drums matched heartbeats, boom, 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 creating a rhythm that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. Conch shells wailed like wind through the underworld's gates. This was theater, yes, but theater with universe-altering consequences. Then came the moment of truth. The ball game had been rigged, of course. Cacao Seed had played magnificently, the gods demanded real effort, but the outcome was predetermined. The rubber ball, representing the sun's journey across the sky, had passed through the stone ring at exactly the moment the priest's calculations demanded. Now he knelt before the altar, his body blue, his mind floating on a cocktail of balshe, morning glory seeds, and wild tobacco. Here's where most people get Maya sacrifice wrong. They imagine screaming victims dragged to their deaths. But Cacao Seed knelt willingly, even eagerly. The drugs helped, certainly, but more powerful was a lifetime of theological conditioning. He was about to feed the cosmos directly. His cur would flow straight to the gods' mouths. Heroes in his culture didn't slay dragons. They became the feast that kept dragons alive. The flint knife was a masterpiece of ritual technology, napped from a single piece of obsidian sharper than surgical steel. It had been used for this purpose for generations. The chief priest himself, high on the same drug cocktail, positioned it below Cacao Seed's sternum. The cut would go up and left, between the ribs, straight to the heart. Quick, precise, practiced. But the gods had other plans. They always did. The first cut opened Cacao Seed's chest, but the priest's hand hesitated. In the religious ecstasy of the moment, augmented by powerful hallucinogens, he saw something. The prince's heart was glowing, literally glowing with accumulated core. This wasn't just any noble. This was a cosmic battery charged to capacity. The priest began to weep, understanding he was about to release enough divine life force to power the sun for a full season. The extraction took 4 seconds. The priest's hand plunged through the opening, grasped the still-beating heart and yanked. The arteries snapped like harp strings. Cacao Seed's eyes remained open, conscious for perhaps another heartbeat, watching his own organ held high above the priest's head. The crowd's roar shook the pyramid stones. Now here's where it gets truly dark. The heart wasn't just removed. It was fed to the gods while still beating. The priest pressed it against the mouth of Chaka's stone statue, blood running down the carved channels designed to direct the flow into sacred vessels. Each pulse sent core directly into the divine digestive system. The gods were drinking life itself, still warm, still moving. Cacao Seed's body, now just empty architecture, tumbled down the pyramid steps. But even this was part of the ritual. The corpse would be carefully butchered, not as meat, but as sacred relics. His skull would join thousands in the Tsampantlai, the skull rack that served as a kind of cosmic accounting ledger. His blood would be mixed with copal incense and burned, sending smoke signals to the gods. His skin would be worn by priests in ceremonies that let them channel his noble essence. The crowd below wasn't horrified. They were relieved. The sun would rise tomorrow. The rains would come. The cosmos would continue its daily dying and resurrection cycle. Because Prince Cacao Seed had paid the price. Children were held up to see better, to understand what heroism looked like in their world. This was their equivalent of a moon landing. A moment when human effort touched the divine. But removal of the heart was just the beginning. The body, now a sacred object rather than a person, had to be processed according to strict protocols. The priests worked with the precision of surgeons and the reverence of saints. Each organ had its destiny. The liver went to the earth gods, buried in the temple foundation. The brain was burned with sacred herbs, its smoke carrying memories to the ancestral realm. The horror of Maya sacrifice wasn't in its brutality but in its logic. This made perfect sense within their worldview. If you truly believed the universe was dying, if you truly believed human suffering was the only cure, then what they did was not just reasonable, but heroic. Every sacrifice was a soldier dying to protect reality itself. But removing the heart was just the beginning. What happened to the body afterward defied all modern sensibilities. The priest's hands trembled, not from revulsion but from reverence, as they prepared the flesh. Prince Cacao Seed's body, having tumbled down the pyramid, was now carried with infinite care to the temple's inner sanctum. What happened next wasn't cannibalism. as we understand it. Not hunger, not savagery, not even dominance. This was sacred metabolization, the careful recycling of qi through human digestive systems, transforming enemy nobles into part of the victor's spiritual anatomy. The butchering followed protocols unchanged for centuries. First, the skin was removed in a single piece, an operation requiring extraordinary skill. This would be worn by priests during rain ceremonies, allowing them to literally inhabit the captured prince's divine essence. The muscles were separated along natural divisions, each group destined for different ritual purposes. Nothing was wasted. Everything had cosmic purpose. But wait, we're not even at the worst part. The preparation method mattered as much as the consumption. The flesh designated for eating, primarily from the arms and thighs, was boiled with sacred herbs, not for flavor but for spiritual enhancement. Chili peppers opened divine channels. Cacao connected the meal to the god's own. Hallucinogenic mushrooms ensured that eating became a visionary experience. This wasn't a meal but a pharmaceutical compound delivered through ritual ingestion. Lord Smoking Squirrel, as the victorious war captain, received the right hand, the hand that had wielded weapons, that had gestured in royal commands, that had performed bloodletting. He ate it slowly, reverently, feeling cacao seeds merging with his own. This wasn't metaphorical. The Maya believed that consuming an enemy's flesh literally transferred their spiritual power to the eater. You became what you ate in the most profound sense possible. The distribution followed strict hierarchies. High priests received the heart meat, already infused with divine energy from its offering to the gods. War captains got the muscle tissue, incorporating enemy strength into their own bodies. Scribes were given small portions of brain tissue, gaining access to enemy knowledge. Even commoners might receive a few drops of blood mixed into corn gruel, allowing the entire city to participate in the spiritual victory. Here's where modern minds recoil, but Maya logic shines. They saw the human body as a temporary container for Kaga, divine life force. When someone died, especially in sacrifice, that Kaga needed somewhere to go. Letting it dissipate would be wasteful, even sacrilegious. By consuming the flesh, they ensured that accumulated spiritual power remained in circulation, like recycling precious metals rather than burying them. The ritual cannibalism wasn't limited to enemies. When a great king died naturally, portions of his body might be consumed by his successor, ensuring continuity of divine authority. When a powerful priest passed, his apprentices might eat small portions to inherit his wisdom. This wasn't desecration, but the highest form of honor, transformation into living memory. What they discovered changed everything about Maya concepts of identity. You weren't just yourself, you were an accumulation of everyone you'd ritually consumed, a walking composite of spiritual energy. Lord Smoking Squirrel carried within him the Kaga of dozens of enemy nobles, each one adding to his cosmic weight. When he performed bloodletting, he released not just his own life force, but the concentrated power of his incorporated enemies. The psychological effect was profound. Warriors who had eaten enemy flesh fought with supernatural confidence, believing they carried the strength of 2, 5, 10 men. Priests who had consumed their predecessors spoke with voices of accumulated authority. Even the act of resistance became complicated. How do you fight an enemy who has literally incorporated your captured comrades into their being? But the Maya took this even further. The highest grade of ritual cannibalism involved consuming portions of gods themselves, or rather, humans who had been transformed into gods through ritual. Remember Prince Cacao Seed's blue paint? That wasn't just symbolism. Through drugs, ritual, and collective belief, he had become an avatar of Chak. Eating his flesh meant eating God flesh, a form of communion that Christian theology would find familiar, yet horrifying. The evidence for ritual cannibalism is overwhelming. Bones found in sacred deposits show cut marks consistent with defleshing. Ceramic vessels depict the consumption of human flesh in ritual contexts. Most tellingly, Maya art shows the practice openly, without shame or concealment. This wasn't a dark secret, but a celebrated sacrament. The final transformation came with digestion itself. As Lord Smoking Squirrel's body broke down cacao seed's flesh, converting it to energy and waste, the coup completed its journey. Some would be absorbed, permanently adding to the Lord's spiritual mass. Some would pass through, returning to the earth to nourish the crops that would feed future sacrifices. Even excrement had cosmic significance in this closed-loop spiritual economy. As disturbing as these practices were during prosperity, wait until you hear what happened when the rain stopped coming. The careful ritual gave way to panicked slaughter as the drought entered its third year. Kapan had always prided itself on doing things properly. The bloodletting schedules were precise. The sacrifices followed ancient protocols. But as the maize withered in the fields and the reservoirs turned to cracked mud, something fundamental broke in the Maya cosmic equation. If measured suffering could maintain the universe, what happened when the universe stopped responding to the usual payments? The paleoclimatological data tells a story of cascading catastrophe. Tree rings show the drought beginning around 8, but that was just the opening act. Decreased rainfall led to crop failure. Crop failure led to increased sacrifice to appease the rain god Chak. Increased sacrifice led to warfare for captives. Warfare disrupted agricultural cycles. Disrupted agriculture worsened famine. The feedback loop tightened like a noose. Here's where it gets truly dark. The priest mathematicians tried to solve the equation. If one royal bloodletting brought a day of light rain, how much blood would end a 3-year drought? If one captured noble's heart could ensure a season's fertility, how many hearts would resurrect dead fields? The math led to only one conclusion: more, always more. King Smoke Shell of Kapan ordered the unthinkable mass sacrifice of his own nobles. The cosmic battery system only worked with high-grade Ka, the divine life force concentrated in royal blood. But enemy cities were suffering the same drought, hoarding their own nobles. The king turned inward, demanding his courtiers' children for the altars. The first to refuse was his own brother. What happened next would determine not just the kingdom's fate, but the fate of Maya civilization itself. The abandonment of ritual precision marked the beginning of the end. Where once a single heart extraction took hours of preparation, now dozens died daily in assembly line slaughter. The blue paint ran out. The sacred drugs were replaced with crude pulp. The prayers were shortened, then skipped entirely. This wasn't cosmic maintenance anymore. This was desperate bargaining with an unresponsive universe. The archaeological evidence from Kapan's final years is heartbreaking. Hastily dug mass graves filled with nobles identifiable by their cranial deformation and jade dental inlays. Altars so thick with blood deposits that they had to be abandoned for new ones. And most telling, the complete absence of enemy captives. Kapan was eating itself, but the gods weren't satisfied. They never were. The escalation followed a terrible logic. If noble blood wasn't enough, perhaps the gods wanted quantity over quality. Commoner sacrifices increased exponentially. The temporary skull racks grew so heavy they collapsed, crushing priests beneath avalanches of bone. Children were thrown into cenotes, sacred wells, their small bodies weighted with stone. The careful theology of cosmic maintenance devolved into pure sympathetic magic. Water for water, life for rain. The environmental data shows the drought breaking briefly around 1823 CE, just enough to give false hope. The rains that came were violent, washing away topsoil already damaged by deforestation. The brief agricultural recovery only enabled more intensive sacrifice when the drought returned worse than before. Hope became its own kind of torture. Here's the cosmic irony that broke Maya civilization. Their solution accelerated their destruction. Every tree cut for sacrificial fires worsened erosion. Every farmer pulled from fields for ritual duty meant less food production. Every noble bled to death meant fewer competent administrators. The city-states were performing civilizational bloodletting, weakening themselves precisely when they needed maximum strength. The final inscriptions from Kapan are fragmentary but revealing. King Smoke Shell, in a text dated to 1822 CE, claims to have sacrificed stars of blood, likely meaning numbers so large they could only be expressed astronomically. The last dated monument from 830 CE is unfinished. The scribe apparently stopped mid-glyph, leaving a sentence about divine hunger literally incomplete. The abandonment pattern tells its own story. First, the outlying residential areas emptied as farmers fled starvation and conscription for sacrifice. Then the noble quarters as elite families escaped the increasingly deranged demands of desperate kings. Finally, only the temple complexes remained occupied, staffed by skeleton crews of priests, still mechanically performing rituals for gods who had clearly stopped listening. Other cities fared no better. Palenque's last king sacrificed his own children. Tikal's priests resorted to sacrificing animals dressed as humans, hoping to fool the gods. Caracol simply stopped recording anything, its final monuments left blank, as if the scribes had run out of hope to carve. The Great Maya collapse wasn't a single event, but thousands of local apocalypses, each city dying its own particular death. The mathematics of desperation led to one inescapable conclusion. The cosmic machine was broken beyond repair. The blood payments that had maintained the universe for 1,000 years had stopped working. The Maya faced a theological crisis that made mere starvation seem trivial. What do you do when the gods themselves abandon you? The elites weren't the only ones feeding this hungry universe. Every single Maya person paid a blood tax. Before sunrise, the farmer Itzel sliced his earlobe, letting drops fall onto each corn seed. Itzel wasn't noble. His skull hadn't been shaped in infancy. His teeth bore no jade inlays. His blood would never flow on pyramid altars. But the cosmic hunger didn't distinguish by class. Every Maya person, from king to slave, owed the universe a blood debt that accumulated interest daily. For commoners like Itzel, payment came in small but constant installments. The morning bloodletting was just the beginning. As he placed each corn kernel in the earth, a drop of his blood went with it, payment to the maize god for hopeful growth. His wife Acna had already bled from her earlobes onto the hearthstones, ensuring the fire god would keep their cooking flames alive. Their 6-year-old son would soon make his first offering, learning that existence itself required negotiation through pain. But wait, we're not even at the worst part. The agricultural blood tax was precise, not random suffering, but calculated payments for specific outcomes. 3 drops per seed during normal planting, 7 during drought, 13 if the previous harvest had failed. The blood mixed with earth, creating a supernatural fertilizer that connected human life force directly to crop growth. Itzel's grandfather had taught him the ratios, just as his grandfather's grandfather had taught him, stretching back to the first humans who learned that gods were hungry. Women faced their own blood economics. Childbirth was cosmic warfare, with mortality rates that made every pregnancy a potential sacrifice. Acna had survived 4 births, a heroic record. Women who died delivering children received the same posthumous honors as warriors killed in battle. Both had shed blood in service of continuation. Both had paid the ultimate price to keep the cosmic machine running. What they discovered changed everything about daily life. Every action required its blood tithe. Building a house, blood on the foundation stones. Planting a tree, blood on the roots. Starting a journey, blood on the road. The Maya lived in a constant state of minor self-mutilation, their bodies maps of small scars, each one a receipt for cosmic transactions. The implements were modest but effective. Obsidian blades no bigger than fingernails, kept sharp enough to open skin with minimal pressure. Thorns from specific plants, graded by size for different bloodletting needs. Stingray spines for nobles, while commoners made do with fish bones, turkey spurs, or simple stone point. Every household had its bloodletting kit, as essential as cooking pots. Children learned early. By age 6 they were making small offerings from their earlobes. By 10 they could pierce their own tongues for minor ritual. By puberty, they were full participants in the blood economy, their bodies producing the currency that kept their world stable. The first bloodletting was celebrated like a first word or first step, a milestone marking entry into cosmic citizenship. Here's where the psychological burden becomes clear. Imagine knowing that your family's survival depended not just on hard work, but on how much pain you could endure. Every failed crop meant you hadn't bled enough. Every sick child suggested insufficient offering. Every stroke of bad luck could be traced to some missed payment in blood. The Maya lived under constant cosmic audit, their suffering never quite sufficient. The gendered divisions of common bloodletting reflected larger cosmological beliefs. Men bled primarily from ears and penises, organs associated with hearing divine commands and generating life. Women bled from tongues and earlobes, connected to prophecy and nurturing. Children of both sexes started with earlobes, the training ground for future suffering. Even slaves bled, their offerings mixed with their owner's blood to create household protection. But common blood wasn't premium currency. Where a drop of royal blood might buy a season of rain, a commoner's blood bought only days or hours. This created perverse incentive. Commoners had to bleed more frequently, in greater quantities, for lesser results. A farmer might lose a significant portion of his blood over a planting season, weakening him precisely when he needed strength for agricultural labor. The archaeological evidence is heartbreaking. Common burials show bones pitted from chronic anemia. Children's skeletons reveal growth interruptions corresponding to bloodletting schedules. Adult remains display arthritis in joints stressed by blood loss-induced weakness. The Maya were literally bleeding themselves into early graves, their bodies worn out by constant cosmic taxation. The most insidious aspect was how normalized it became. Itzel didn't question why he needed to bleed on his corn seeds any more than modern people question why they need to pay electric bills. It was simply how the universe worked. The bleeding was as routine as breathing, as necessary as eating. To not bleed was to be a cosmic freeloader, stealing existence without payment. The daily accumulation was staggering. If Itzel bled 3 drops per corn seed and planted 100 seeds daily during planting season, and added his morning hearth offering, his pre-meal thanksgiving, and his tool blessing before work, he might lose a cup of blood weekly just to maintain basic existence. Multiply that by every adult in a city, and the commoner blood tax dwarfed noble sacrifices in sheer volume. But blood alone wasn't enough. They needed chemical keys to unlock the divine doorway. The toad's venom mixed with morning glory seeds created a cocktail that would make modern psychonauts pale. The Maya didn't just stumble onto random plants and hope for vision. They were sophisticated psychopharmacologists who had mapped the chemical doorways to divine realms with scientific precision. In the temple laboratories of Palenque, priest-chemists bred specific strains of morning glory for maximum lysergic acid content. They milked buffalo toads during particular lunar phases, when their venom glands produced the most 5-meo. This wasn't primitive shamanism. This was neurochemical engineering. The recipe for the standard Vision Quest brew was as precise as any modern pharmaceutical formula. 13 morning glory seeds, crushed but not powdered. The venom from 1 adult male buffalo toad, collected fresh. 3 dried mushrooms of the Psilocybe mexicana variety. Wild tobacco concentrated through repeated boiling, and balshe bark fermented for exactly 9 days. Mixed wrong. The concoction was merely hallucinogenic. Mixed right, it was a reliable technology for accessing divine dimensions. But the drugs were just the beginning. The preparation of the body mattered, as much as the preparation of the chemicals. 20 days of fasting reduced the user to a state where the blood-brain barrier became permeable. Sexual abstinence accumulated core that could be explosively released during the trip. Most crucially, the systematic bloodletting before ingestion created a state of hypovolemic shock that amplified the psychedelic's effects exponentially. Here's where it gets truly dark. The Maya discovered that pain itself was a psychedelic. The endorphins released during bloodletting created an altered state that the external chemicals could build upon. They mapped the timing precisely. Pierce the penis or tongue first, let the endorphin flood peak, then ingest the brew. While the body's own painkillers were creating internal hallucinations, the external and internal drugs synergized into experiences that shattered normal consciousness. Lord Smoking Squirrel's vision quest followed protocols refined over centuries. First, the isolation in the underground chamber, sensory deprivation, breaking down the barriers between self and cosmos. Then the bloodletting, timed to lunar cycles and planetary position. As his blood flowed, the first preparation was placed under his tongue, concentrated wild tobacco that began the dissociation. 20 minutes later, as the nicotine peaked, the morning glory and toad venom mixture was ingested. What happened next would determine the kingdom's fate, and it was entirely predictable. The Maya had mapped the progression of the divine journey like astronomers mapping star movements. First came the serpents, always the vision serpents born from blood and smoke, their scales made of stars, their mouths speaking in mathematical equations. Then the jaguars, representing the night sun's journey through the underworld. Finally, if the dosage and timing were perfect, direct communication with the gods themselves. But these weren't random hallucinations. The Maya had discovered that specific drug combinations produced specific visions. Toad venom and morning glory together always summoned Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. Psilocybin mushrooms and wild tobacco opened channels to Chak, the rain god. Datura and blood loss connected to the death gods of Jabalba. They had created a chemical telephone system to divine realms. The precision extended to the vision's content. Priests recorded thousands of trip reports, noting patterns and correlation. They discovered that fasting for exactly 20 days produced visions of the future. 25 days brought visions of the past, and 30 days opened doorways to alternate realities where different choices had been made. This wasn't mysticism, but empirical observation refined over generations. The psychedelic technology solved a fundamental problem in Maya theology. If gods required constant blood payment, how could humans verify they were paying the right gods in the right ways? The drugs provided quality control during visions to gods, could communicate directly, adjusting sacrifice schedules, demanding specific types of blood, providing agricultural advice. The chemical interface allowed for real-time cosmic customer service, but the technology had a dark price. The combination of blood loss, fasting, and powerful psychedelics created experiences so intense that many users never fully returned. The Maya had a term, Naru, meaning those who swim too deep in the divine water. Priests who overused the sacred cocktails developed what we might recognize as persistent hallucinogenic perception disorder, unable to distinguish baseline reality from the cosmic overlay. The chemical arms race accelerated as tolerance. What once required a few morning glory seeds eventually demanded hundreds. Priests began mixing in more dangerous additives, mercury from cinnabar, toxic toad species, concentrated datura that killed as often as it enlightened. The quest for stronger divine connections led to a pharmacological extremism that paralleled the blood sacrifice escalation. The most disturbing discovery was that the drugs worked better with fresher blood. The Maya learned that ingesting psychedelics immediately after bloodletting, while the wounds were still flowing, created the most vivid and reliable vision. This led to the practice of simultaneous bloodletting and drug ingestion, participants hallucinating while actively mutilating themselves, the pain and the visions becoming indistinguishable. Armed with blood, drugs, and desperation, the Maya faced their final apocalyptic centuries. In Copan's final days, the altars ran so thick with blood that priests slipped on the stones. The great city that had perfected the mathematics of sacrifice was drowning in its own solution. King Smokeshell had been dead for 3 years, but the bloodletting continued under a succession of increasingly desperate rulers. The careful ritual schedules had collapsed into constant sacrifice. The pyramid steps, once climbed with reverence, were now racing tracks for bodies tumbling down in assembly line efficiency. The archaeological evidence from Copan's last occupation phase tells a story of civilizational madness. Ritual deposits from 850 CE contain a chaos of human remains. Nobles mixed with commoners, adults with children, careful dismemberment replaced by hack marks, suggesting frenzied butchery. The sacred had become the profane, The cosmic maintenance had become cosmic vandalism. But Köppen wasn't unique. Across the Maylands, the same pattern repeated with local variations. Tikal's response was grandiose deny. Even as the population fled and the reservoirs dried, King Jasa Chan Koal III commissioned ever larger monuments, claiming divine favor. The city's last dated stela from 8069 CE shows the king bloodletting from his penis while standing on a pyramid of skulls that reaches to the sky. The carving is exquisite. The city around it was already empty. Palenka tried theological innovation. If traditional bloodletting wasn't working, perhaps the gods wanted something new. The priests began experimenting with novel forms of sacrifice. Drowning in quicksand, slow roasting over sacred fires, elaborate flaying ceremonies that took days to complete. Each innovation bought weeks or months of false hope before failing like all the others. The gods remained unimpressed. Here's where it gets truly dark. Some cities turned to auto-cannibalism, not just sacrificing their own people, but consuming them in recursive loops of desperation. Nobles ate nobles. Priests ate priests. The social hierarchy that had organized Maya civilization for a millennium dissolved into a feeding frenzy, where anyone with blood became potential cosmic fuel. Caracol's end was perhaps the most pathetic. The city simply gave up. The last inscriptions trail off mid-sentence, not from violence, but from exhaustion. The priests stopped recording dates. The kings stopped claiming victory. The bloodletting altars were abandoned, not from enlightenment but from the recognition that the universe had already died, and they were just ghosts going through motions. The climate data shows the drought finally breaking around 900. The theological damage was irreversible. How do you rebuild a civilization based on blood sacrifice, when blood sacrifice has demonstrably failed? How do you restore faith in gods who let their most devoted servants? The Maya faced not just environmental collapse, but complete cosmological bankruptcy. The abandonment happened in waves. First the farmers, fleeing both starvation and conscription for sacrifice. Then the artisans, their skills useless in cities focused only on feeding altar. The merchants followed, trade routes becoming too dangerous as desperate cities raided for sacrificial victims. Finally, even the priests abandoned their posts, leaving behind only the most fanatical or insane. What they discovered in those final years shattered everything they believed. The universe didn't need their blood. After all, the sun rose without sacrifices. The rain came, or didn't come, regardless of suffering. The cosmic machine they'd spent 1,000 years maintaining had either never existed, or had found another power source. The Maya had bled themselves white for nothing. The last hieroglyphic texts are heartbreaking in their confusion. Scribes who had once recorded confident claims of divine favor now carved questions. Why have the gods turned away? What offering have we forgotten? How much blood is enough? The final dated monument in the entire Maya lands, from Tonanai in 909 C, doesn't record a king's triumph or a god's satisfaction. It simply notes that the Khatan ended. Time itself had become meaningless. The cities didn't die violently, they expired. Köppen's last inhabitants lived in the ruins of palaces, burning furniture for warmth, too exhausted for either hope or despair. Tikal's final residents were probably squatters who didn't even remember what the pyramids had been for. The great bloodletting altars became nesting sites for birds. The skull racks collapsed, scattering their contents into anonymous bone fields. But the theology didn't die. It retreated, transformed, went underground. In the highlands of Guatemala, in places like San Juan Chamula, modified versions of blood payment continue. Modern Maya still prick their ears before planting. They still believe in cosmic debts requiring physical payment. The universe as dying machine worldview proved harder to kill than the civilization that created it. The Maya collapse wasn't caused by warfare, disease, or invasion. It was theological suicide. A civilization that believed suffering maintained the cosmos increased suffering until it destroyed itself. The feedback loop they created, more problems requiring more blood, requiring more problems, became a serpent swallowing its own tail, a cosmic Ouroboros that consumed everything the Maya had built. Which brings us back to that temple. That boy, that seventh spine-piercing flesh. Prince Umna pulled the seventh spine free, blood running in rivulets down his thighs. But now we understand what hung in the balance. This wasn't just a prince proving his manhood or claiming his throne. This was a 16-year-old boy carrying the weight of a dying universe on his shoulders. His blood the only currency accepted by gods whose hunger had already devoured 1,000 cities. Each drop that fell onto the bark paper below was a payment against an infinite debt, a sacrifice to entities that might not even exist. The rope began its journey through the wounds the spines had carved. We can see him now not as a primitive savage, but as a young man trapped in a theological prison built by 40 generations of ancestors. Every meter of thorned rope that passed through his flesh was a prayer for rain that might not come, for crops that might fail regardless, for a sunrise that would happen whether he bled or not. The priests watching weren't sadists, but true believers, as convinced of blood's cosmic necessity as we are of gravity. They read the patterns in its flow with the same confidence we read weather satellite. If he endured, if the gods accepted his offering, perhaps Copan could avoid the fate that had already claimed Tikal Palenque, Caracol. Perhaps this time the payment would be enough. But we know how this story ends. Within a generation, Copan too would be empty, its altars abandoned, its pyramids silent. Its prince's blood, like the blood of millions before him, would buy only a temporary reprieve from a collapse that was theological rather than preventable. The Maya had created a worldview where the only solution to suffering was more suffering, where the only answer to divine hunger was human flesh. The horror of Maya blood sacrifice wasn't in its brutality, but in its logic. Every step made sense within their cosmological framework. If you truly believed the universe was dying, if you truly believed human suffering could revive it, then what they did was not just reasonable, but heroic. They were paying the ultimate price to keep existence itself functioning. The modern Maya still carry echoes of this burden. In San Juan Chamula, chickens die in churches to satisfy saints who wear both Catholic and pagan faces. In the highlands of Guatemala, farmers still mix blood with corn seeds. Just a drop now, a cultural memory of when the payment was so much more. The universe's hungry god never quite died. It just learned to survive on smaller meals. What the ancient Maya discovered, or thought they discovered, was that pain could be transformed into power, suffering into cosmic fuel. They built a civilization on this principle, refined it into high art, and ultimately let it consume them. Their blood-soaked theology was perhaps humanity's most elaborate attempt to bargain with an indifferent universe through suffering. Prince Itna completed his ritual. The rope emerged from the final wound, slick with blood and barely visible strips of flesh. He had endured. The gods, for now, were satisfied. He would be king, would rule Copan through its final decades, would ultimately preside over the abandonment of everything his bloodletting was meant to preserve. The Maya taught us something profound about the power of belief to shape reality. They showed that humans will endure literally anything, if convinced it serves a higher purpose. They demonstrated that entire civilizations can be built on foundations of ritualized suffering. Most disturbingly, they proved that such civilizations can function, even thrive, for over 1,000 years. Their sexual blood sacrifices weren't aberrations, but logical conclusions of a worldview that saw the cosmos as fundamentally broken, requiring constant repair through human pain. Every pierced penis, every mutilated tongue, every extracted heart was an attempt to fix something that may never have been broken in the first place. The stingray spines are museum pieces now. The bloodletting altars host only tourists. The skull racks have been carefully catalogued by archaeologists, who can count the bones but never quite feel the weight of belief that put them there. We look back at the Maya blood sacrifices with horror and fascination, seeing in them a darkness we tell ourselves we've outgrown. But have we simply found new altars, new ways to pay imagined debts to hungry gods of our own creation. The Maya at least were honest about the price of their beliefs. They carved it into stone, painted it on pottery, screamed it from pyramid top. They showed us what happens when humans convince themselves that suffering is sacred, that pain has cosmic purpose, that the universe runs on blood. Prince Itna rose from the altar, transformed by agony into divine kingship. His blood had purchased another day, another season, another year of pretending the cosmic machine still functioned. He couldn't know that he was one of the last to pay the price. That soon the altars would fall silent, and the gods would have to find other sources of food or admit they had never been hungry at all. The most horrific sexual practices of the Maya weren't about sex or even sacrifice. They were about the terrible power of belief to transform human bodies into cosmic currency, to make logic from madness, to build entire civilizations on foundations of blood that would ultimately wash away in the rain they were meant to summon.